Get out of the house now. Danny needs that room. That phrase kept echoing in my head like a sharp knife slicing through my mind, lingering and never letting go. At 17 years old, I was just a child, yet I was pushed out of the house I had once thought was a warm place, a place where family would always protect me. But at that moment, I realized that things I thought were certain, the safest things, could change in an instant. Danny needs that room. That was not a request, but an order. My mother stood there, not looking at me, her gaze cold and devoid of empathy. My father remained silent, as if I were no longer his child. They didn't need a reason, no explanation, just the simple excuse. Danny needs more space. And I, the surplus child, had to leave. I couldn't understand why my family would do this to me. Had I done something wrong? I had never rebelled, never done anything to make them angry. I had always been the good child, smart, always trying to please them. But now I was left with only an old backpack containing a few clothes and personal belongings and a rising sense of despair. Looking at my parents, I saw coldness in them, as if I held no value for them to keep. Their gaze, cold, indifferent, as if I were invisible. I couldn't understand, couldn't grasp how they could push me out like that. They didn't need me anymore, but I still couldn't stop loving them, still remembered the days when they comforted me when I fell, when I cried. But now, all those memories seemed like nothing more than a nightmare. Not knowing where to go, I just walked away, no goodbyes. I stepped outside, feeling as though I had been thrown into a strange world, one where no one would welcome me. I set up a tent at the edge of the forest, where I could lie down, listening to the wind and rain, feeling the cold seep through the thin fabric. Every night, I woke up to the sound of the rain tapping, but not because of the silence, but because of the strange loneliness that enveloped me. To survive, I had to do all sorts of jobs that no one cared about. I washed dishes at a small restaurant, hauled goods for truck drivers, and sold street food by the roadside. Each job brought in only a few coins, but that was all I could do. Every day I woke up, all I felt was hunger gnawing at my stomach and the exhaustion from the heavy work. I saw people around me with families, with friends, but I was alone in a makeshift tent and long, sleepless nights. In those moments, I realized that family, the people I once thought would always be there for me, are sometimes the very ones who turn their backs when you need them most. That feeling hurt more than any wound I had ever suffered. They taught me that sacrifice is never repaid, and perhaps I would never forget my mother's cold words, "Danny needs that room." That phrase would haunt me for the rest of my life. But no matter what, I couldn't let myself fall. I knew I had to keep living, because only I could stand up and start again. My childhood was a long string of days left behind, always having to endure being compared to my brother Danny, the talented, spoiled child. Every morning when the sunlight filtered through the window onto my bed, I would hear my mother talking about Danny. Danny won first place in the school's swimming competition again. "Look, my son is so outstanding," my mother would say with pride, her eyes lighting up as if he were the perfect child I could never be. Every word she said felt like a sharp knife cutting into my heart. I was just the average child, nothing special. I was smart, hardworking, but still couldn't surpass Danny, the child always favored and praised. The days I spent diligently doing my homework, my mother was busy with Danny's activities. Just one sentence I kept hearing in my head: "Danny needs more attention. You can take care of yourself." So my younger brother, who never lacked love, was always the center of attention. My mother devoted all her love and time to him, and me? I only had silence, avoidance, and moments of being forgotten during family conversations. Whenever something went wrong, I was always the one blamed. Once, when I was studying for an exam, a sports competition of Danny's took place. The whole family, from grandparents to distant relatives, gathered to watch him compete. My mother smiled, holding my father's hand, and said, "Look at Danny. He always makes me proud." Meanwhile, I sat alone in the corner of the house. No one invited me to watch. "Stay home and help me with the cooking," my mother said, turning away with a look that made it seem like that was the obvious thing to do. I just stood there, staring out the window, my eyes blurry from tears that couldn't fall. I couldn't understand why I had to do that when I also wanted to watch Danny compete, wanted to be part of those important moments. But to them, I was nothing. Every time something bad happened, I was the first to be blamed. Once, when my mother spilled a cup, the whole family turned to look at me with suspicion. "It's you again. You have to be more careful," my mother scolded. I said nothing, just lowered my head, trying to hide the humiliation in my heart. No matter what I did right, I was always the invisible child, a shadow that was constantly forgotten in the family stories. Those years, I lived in the feeling of being abandoned, like a ghost in my own house. Perhaps I had started to feel like I didn't belong there. Every morning, I would hear my mother calling Danny, asking if he was okay, if he was feeling tired, while I silently ate my breakfast alone. The meals had no conversation, no laughter. I felt like a ghost in my own home, no one acknowledging my existence. I didn't need attention, I just wanted to be recognized as their child, even if only once. But I didn't want to let that loneliness imprison me. I decided to take care of myself. I no longer expected love from my family. I began to figure out how to live on my own. I moved from job to job, from washing cars at an auto shop to selling food on the street. Every day, I worked hard, earning a few coins, never daring to dream of more than a full meal. One day, after nearly a decade of hardship, I bought my first home. The feeling of stepping into my first home was indescribable. The house wasn't big, but it was all I had achieved after years of hard work. I looked around, seeing the new walls, the bright windows letting in light. I couldn't believe I was standing here, in the house I had once thought would always be a dream. A dream I had fought with myself, with loneliness, with sleepless nights, and long, exhausting days. I had never felt such happiness in my life. When I placed my hand on the door of the house, I knew I had won, not just in the battle with my family, but in the battle with myself. I was no longer the surplus child. I had risen, built my own life, and now I could proudly say that I had achieved what others thought I couldn't. That feeling when I could finally stand on my own without needing anyone else is something I will never forget. But what I didn't expect was that family would come back when I was successful. I had thought that after everything I had gone through, after all the years of struggling, I would have my own life without anyone disturbing me. I thought I had escaped the wounds of the past, had stood strong on my own feet, free to do what I wanted without caring about anyone else. But I was wrong. When I thought everything had ended, my family appeared once again. One weekend afternoon, while I was standing on my balcony, enjoying the fresh air after a tiring week of work, I saw my mother and father standing at the gate of my house. My mother was wearing her old coat, her face indifferent, as if nothing from the past existed anymore. My father stood beside her, arms crossed, his gaze cold. They both looked at me, not a word of greeting, not an explanation. They just stood there, silent, as if everything from the past had never happened. My mother was the first to speak, her voice soft and fake to the point that I could almost feel the coldness in her words. "Can we live here?" She looked at me, her smile sending a shiver down my spine. I knew she was trying to sound sweet, but I couldn't fool myself. It was just an excuse, a manipulation they thought I would easily accept. "What?" I blurted out, my voice trembling with anger. I looked at them, unable to believe what I was hearing. My eyes narrowed, a feeling of furious fire igniting within me. "After everything you've done to me, you think you can come here and ask me to let you live in my house?" My mother didn't answer immediately. She just stood there, staring at me with a cold, emotionless gaze. My father shrugged, as though everything we had been through was meaningless. I couldn't stop looking at them, humiliation rising up in me. I had spent so many years living alone, fighting against the abandonment of my own family, and now they were coming back with only one reason: to use me. My mother's question felt like a bucket of cold water being poured over me, leaving me choking on my anger. "Why do you think I would let you live here?" I spat each word out. "You kicked me out of the house, abandoned me, and now you come to demand to live in the house I bought with my own hands?" My mother kept her cold smile, and my father stood silent, not saying a word. I felt like I was looking at a reflection of myself in them, deceitful, indifferent. After I didn't respond, they continued with their ruthless threat. "If you don't let us live here, we'll sue you," my father said, his voice as cold as steel. "We are family, and we have the right to live in this house." At that moment, it felt like a lightning strike hitting me. "You think I'm afraid of you? You think I'll give in to you again?" I scoffed, unable to control the anger within me. "What you did to me, do you think I'll forget?" My mother stared at me, her gaze devoid of remorse, only filled with indifference and arrogance. When the case went to court, I discovered a shocking truth. They had embezzled the entire inheritance my grandfather had left me. All the things I had fought for, not just to protect my right to live, but also to protect what I deserved to inherit, were suddenly thrown away like old trash. When the lawsuit went to court, I had hoped for some justice, some acknowledgement, but instead, I received a horrific shock. Your parents took all the inheritance money, my lawyer said, his face also filled with disbelief. They spent it all on Danny, buying a car, opening a restaurant for your sister, and many other things. The money is gone, and it was embezzled. Those words exploded in my mind like a bomb. The money my grandfather had left me, the money he had saved his whole life, was taken by my family without hesitation. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My grandfather had left it to me because he trusted me, but now everything was just a betrayal. In court, I looked at my mother and father's faces, feeling no pity at all. They stood there, their faces unchanged, offering no defense. All they could do was remain silent, knowing they were wrong. And I just wanted to get back what was rightfully mine, what I deserved. The court finally made its ruling. Not only did they lose the right to live in my house, but they also had to return the entire inheritance my grandfather had left, along with a fine for dishonesty. I didn't just win the lawsuit. I proved that they could no longer exploit me, exploit the love I had given them. The feeling when I stepped out of the courthouse, looking back at my family standing in silence, was the feeling of a victor. When I heard the decision from the court, it felt like all the weight, all the pain from the years past, suddenly disappeared. I couldn't believe my ears. How could this be? Just one brief statement from the judge, but in that moment, I felt relief so overwhelming it took my breath away. I had won. Everything I had fought for, all the suffering and humiliation I had endured, had finally amounted to something. Not just a legal victory, but recognition. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had value. No longer the abandoned child, no longer the silent shadow in the family, I was the winner. Not only were they denied a share of the inheritance, but they also had to return the entire amount of my grandfather's legacy, plus a fine for their dishonest actions. When the decision was announced, I could see the disappointment clearly on my mother and father's faces. My mother, who had always been proud and arrogant, could no longer maintain her cold expression. She lowered her head, her eyes hollow, unwilling to look at me. My father, who had always stood with indifference, now had no sense of superiority. His gaze passed over me, but there was no pride as there had been before. They knew they had failed, and I had done it. I stood firm. I had power, the power they had once taken from me. And ironically, now my family had to live under my control. When I walked out of the courthouse, my heart was filled with complex emotions. There was joy, but not an overwhelming amount. I no longer hated them, no longer sought revenge, but I couldn't forget what they had done. Now my family had to live under my terms. They had to pay rent on time, or the contract would have a clause to evict them. It sounded ironic, but I wasn't happy about it. I only felt a kind of ruthlessness, an emptiness I couldn't explain. And they, standing there, my mother, my father, and Danny, now had no control. The three people who once meant the most to me now had to bow their heads before me. I looked at them with no emotion in my eyes. "You've exploited me for far too long," I said, my voice steady but firm. "Now you have to pay the price." My mother remained silent, just standing there, saying nothing. She looked at me, her eyes full of regret, but also shame. My father turned his face away, as if he didn't want to face the truth. And Danny, my younger brother, just stood quietly, not daring to look at me. I could see the embarrassment and shame in his eyes. Danny, the family's golden child, no longer had any support. No longer was the pampered child everyone adored. I didn't need to say anything else. It was all clear. I had brought justice back to myself. Remember to pay on time. My words were like a cold warning. If not, the contract will have a clause to evict you. I looked at them, devoid of any emotion, just the execution of the power I had earned. I didn't feel joy saying those words, but I didn't feel regret either. I had lost too much, and now it was time for me to take control of my life. No one could control me anymore. No one could exploit me. My mother looked at me one last time, then turned away, not daring to say a word. My father followed, his steps heavy, no longer the strong man he once was. Danny, my brother, slowly walked toward the door, not daring to lift his head to look at me. And I, standing in the middle of this house, for the first time in my life, felt truly free. My family now had to pay for what they had done to me. And I, no longer the surplus child, had become the one in control of my life, the one with power, the one who could stand tall, no matter what they had done to try to pull me down. After everything I had been through, I decided to open a small shop specializing in antique clock repairs, a job I had loved since I was a child. Finally, I could live for myself, no longer having to look into the eyes of others for approval or judgment. The long days of fighting against humiliation, loneliness, and betrayal had given me the strength to stand tall. I didn't need recognition or praise from anyone anymore. Opening this shop wasn't about proving anything. It was about fulfilling a dream I had since childhood, a place where I could freely create and do what I loved without having to live under anyone's watchful eye. Each antique clock I repaired brought me a small joy, a sense of fulfillment I had never experienced before. I remembered sitting by my grandfather's workbench, watching him meticulously repair each old clock, his eyes full of patience and attention to detail. He had instilled in me a love for antiques, for persistence, and for the care in every small detail. Now I was doing that same work, repairing the clocks myself, breathing new life into them, just as I had found new life after so many years of struggle. My little shop gradually became a peaceful place where I could return to whenever I felt weary. Customers came and went, but the most important thing was that I knew I was doing what I loved. I no longer lived in fear of being rejected or exploited. I lived for myself, no longer needing to prove anything to anyone. As for my family, they were no longer the ones I had to take care of or hope for. I had once wanted them to understand me, to love me as I had loved them. But now, after everything that had happened, I realized that my unconditional sacrifice would never be repaid with recognition from them. They had abandoned me when I needed them the most, and now I no longer needed their approval. My family was no longer an important part of my life. They lived off me as if everything they had done to me was the price they had to pay. When I saw them, I no longer felt anger. I only felt emptiness. They were no longer the people I needed to take care of. They were no longer the ones I hoped would change. I was the one in control, the one standing firm in this life, and I had learned to live without needing anyone to rescue me. Danny, now unemployed and drowning in debt, had no one to protect him anymore. My younger brother, Danny, was no longer the pampered child everyone loved and protected. I knew that those years had made him weak and dependent. When I saw him, I couldn't help but feel a bit of regret, but I also knew that he had put himself in this situation. Without the protection of our parents, without the family's shelter, Danny now had to face the consequences of his mistakes. He was unemployed, with no stable income, struggling with debt. I was no longer someone he could turn to for help. I had stood tall, and now it was time for him to face reality. As for me, I had become the master, the one who stood firm in this life. I couldn't help but feel proud of myself. The years spent in darkness, being rejected, being abandoned were now a thing of the past. I had overcome it all, risen from the deepest pit, and built a new life. My shop wasn't just a place where I worked, but a symbol of my victory. I had become the master, not just of the shop, but of my own life. I didn't need forgiveness. I didn't need recognition. I had taken control of my own life without needing anyone by my side. And though my family was no longer a part of my life, I was proud of the path I had taken. Because in the end, I had found freedom. I had found myself in the small tasks, in the antique clocks I repaired. Have you ever been treated unfairly by your family just because you weren't the favorite child? If you were in my shoes, would you forgive or cut ties like the protagonist? Share your thoughts and experiences below, because maybe someone out there needs to hear your story to regain their strength. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to support stories of turning the tables and reclaiming justice for those who were once overlooked.